Welcome to the deep dive. So if you're a gardener, especially one who loves Coleus, those incredibly vibrant plants, you've probably run into this mystery.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
You take two cuttings, maybe even from the same parent plant, you treat them exactly the same. Same jar, same water, same spot on the windowsill.
Hmm.
And yet, one just takes off. Roots everywhere, almost instantly. Our sources said virtually overnight, which feels right sometimes.
Really can be that fast.
But the other one just sits there, looks healthy maybe, but no roots for days, maybe even weeks. It's baffling what's really going on.
Right. It makes you question everything you're doing.
Exactly. So today we're diving into some notes a gardener shared, someone who tracked this exact striking difference, as they put it. And our mission here is to sort of cut through the usual advice, Is it the technique? Is it the parent plant's health? Or maybe is it something deeper, like genetics, that decides if a cutting makes it?
Well, it's interesting you framed it that way, because gardeners often do blame themselves or the water or the light.
Yeah, the external stuff.
Precisely. But what the source material seems to suggest, pretty strongly actually, is that the real answer. It's inside the cutting itself.
Okay.
It boils down to two main things based on these notes. The physiological state of the mother plant it came from.
Right. Its overall health.
Exactly. And maybe even more significantly, the specific genetic code of that particular Coleus variety, the cultivar.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's unpack that. Maybe start with the mother plant's health. The stock plant condition. That feels like something we, can control maybe, or at least influence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the foundation. We often just snip a stem thinking, oh, this looks okay, without considering the bigger picture of the parent plant.
We get a bit lazy, perhaps.
Could be. Think about it like this. That little cutting starts its independent life with only the resources its parent packed for it, like a lunchbox.
Okay. Lunchbox. I like that.
If the mother plant is struggling, maybe it's stressed, not getting enough nutrients, or really badly root bound, then that cutting's lunchbox is pretty much empty.
Okay. So it hasn't got the energy reserve.
Exactly. It needs energy, it needs hormones, all that stuff, to switch from being just a piece of stem to actually growing roots and supporting itself. If the parent is compromised, the cutting's already behind.
So what are the signs then, according to the sources? What tells you a mother plant isn't in the right state to provide good cuttings?
Well, one thing that really stood out in the notes was the condition of the parent's roots. If the stock plant is severely root bound.
Crammed in its pot.
Yeah, exactly. Or if it's clearly nutrient deficient, maybe pale leaves, slow growth, those cuttings are going to struggle dramatically. The parent is just trying to survive, not storing up extra resources for propagation.
That makes total sense. It's running on empty, can't fuel a spin-off. But, sometimes you see a really big established Coleus, looks massive and healthy. You'd think a cutting from that would be great. Why might a thick, mature stem actually be worse sometimes?
Yeah, that's a great point and leads right into another key finding, the energy drain issue. The sources are pretty clear about avoiding mature stems, especially if they have flower buds or are actively flowering.
Okay, why is flowering such a problem? Even a tiny little bud.
It's all about where the plant is putting its energy, its internal budget, you could say.
Right.
Once a plant switches into blooming growth mode, making flowers, thinking about seeds, it shifts resources away from vegetative growth.
Which is roots and leaves.
Exactly, roots and leaves. So if you take a cutting right when the parent plant is focused on flowering, that cutting is already sort of hormonally programmed to finish that reproductive cycle, not focus on making roots to survive on its own.
Okay, but wait. What if I see a flower bud on the cutting I just took and I pinch it off? Does that fix it? Does it, reset the cutting's priorities?
Good question. Pinching it off is definitely important. You stop the ongoing drain.
Mm-hmm.
But the source material kind of implies the hormonal shift might have already happened deep in the stem tissue.
Yeah. So the signal's already been sent.
Potentially, yes. The hormones that trigger flowering, things like gibberellins, they might already be active in there. You might still get roots, but it probably won't root as fast or as reliably as a cutting taken from a stem that was purely focused on vegetative growth.
You want that youthful, growing energy, not the retirement phase focused on the next generation.
Exactly. You want stems from the active growth phase, young, vigorous, well-fed, and definitely not flowering.
Okay. So that covers the ideal state of the cutting based on the parent. But what about that scenario where you have two cuttings, both look perfect, both young, healthy, non-flowering, and still one roots way faster?
Right.
That's where we have to shift from the plant's condition to its its
Yeah.
internal programming, right?
The genetics.
Precisely.
Now we're talking about the cultivar's inherent traits, the genetic blueprint.
And this is where maybe the beauty we select for comes at a bit of a cost.
Yeah, it's a very insightful way to put it. Because yes, rooting ability seems to be literally written into the DNA of some varieties more than others. Well, the notes suggest some cultivars are just, well, genetically predisposed to root quicker. They're just built different, you could say.
Okay.
And there seem to be two main reasons why, internally. First, some plants naturally have higher levels of rooting hormones, auxins specifically.
Auxins. Okay, I've heard of those. They're like the go signal for root
Pretty
parent.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
Think of it as having the engine already revved up. These high auxin plants are just waiting for the signal, like being put in water, to start producing roots like crazy.
And the second reason?
The second factor mentioned is about the cambium layer. That's the thin layer of active growth cells just under the stem surface.
Right, where the new roots actually emerge from.
Exactly. In some cultivars, that cambium layer is just more sensitive, more responsive. It detects the change being cut, being in water almost instantly, and gets right to work building root initials. They're just wired for speed.
So fast rooters, high auxins, super responsive cambium. Got it. They're optimized for cloning themselves. But like we hinted, we gardeners often chase the fancy Coleus, don't we?
We do.
The ones with the wild variegation, the ruffled edges, the really dark or bright, unusual patterns.
Absolutely. The more unique, the better, often.
But the sources suggest those specific traits, the ones we find so beautiful, might actually hold them back when it comes to rooting. Is that the aha moment here?
I think it really is. That's one of the clearest takeaways from the gardener's notes. There's a definite correlation mentioned. The more complex the look, highly variegated, super ruffled, delicate textures, the more challenging they can be to root.
Wow. Why would that be?
Well, it seems to be a kind of genetic trade-off. Think about all the different genes involved. Genes for leaf shape, color patterns, structure, and genes for things like auxin production and cambium sensitivity.
Okay.
When plant breeders select really heavily for those extreme visual traits, say super intricate variegation or massive ruffles, which often take a lot of energy for the plant just to maintain.
Right. They must be resource intensive.
Exactly. It seems like the plant's genetic resources get prioritized towards making and maintaining that look, potentially at the expense of optimizing for rapid root production. The genes driving that amazing pattern might even compete with, or perhaps slightly suppress, the pathways that produce lots of rooting hormones.
So my super fancy, rare striped Coleus, its genetics are basically saying, look, I'm busy being gorgeous over here. Maintaining this pattern takes effort. Roots. Yeah, I'll get to them eventually.
That's a pretty good way to think about it, yeah. You're seeing its genetic priorities in action. It's performing exactly as its unique code dictates, even if that code isn't ideal for quick cloning.
The notes mention this too, right? Like comparing old school green ones to newer fancy ones?
Yes, explicitly. They describe how some of the simpler, maybe plain green or basic bicolor, old school Coleus varieties root almost without fail. They seem genetically optimized for just growing vegetative vigor, whereas the newer, more complex exotic cultivars often require a lot more patience and care to get them to root successfully.
That really changes how you see it, doesn't it? If your prized, complex variety takes 2 weeks to show roots, it's not necessarily that you failed. It might just be the price of beauty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's potentially a success in breeding for aesthetics, just not for propagation speed.
Okay, so let's pull these two big ideas together. To get the fastest rooting, you need a combination, right?
Right.
You need the right starting point. Physiologically young, healthy, actively growing, non-flowering, stems from a well-cared-for parent plant.
Check. The ideal lunchbox.
And you also need the right genetic foundation, a cultivar, that's naturally geared towards vigorous vegetative growth and quick rooting.
Precisely. The two factors work together.
So what's the main takeaway for you, the listener, trying to propagate Coleus?
I think the big shift is to look beyond just the cutting in the jar. You need to think about its whole backstory. Assess the health and condition of the mother plant before you even snip.
Okay.
And, crucially, understand the inherent nature of the specific variety you're working with. Know its tendencies.
So if I have a really simple, tough, fast-growing variety, maybe I can get away with slightly less perfect conditions.
Probably, yeah. It has that genetic predisposition working in its favor. It might overcome a slight stressor.
But if I'm trying to root that really special, delicate, highly variegated one,
Then you need to make sure everything else is absolutely perfect. The mother plant needs to be in peak condition, unstressed, well-fed, growing strong to give that cutting the best possible chance because its genetics might be working against rapid rooting. You need to
Do
compensate.
that shift in thinking from what's wrong with the water to what's the plant's history and blueprint, that's really useful. Thank you for sharing these insights from the sources. It definitely gives us a new lens for looking at Coleus propagation.
My pleasure. It certainly makes you appreciate the plants in a different way.
It really does, even if those stunning patterns mean we have to wait a bit longer for roots.
Indeed. And perhaps one final thought to leave you with, building on that idea of beauty versus speed. Consider how a plant's natural survival strategy, which often favors being tough and rooting quickly, might actually be compromised by the very aesthetic traits we find desirable and select for.
Mhm.
If our breeding choices prioritize, say, extreme variegation over high auxin levels, are we essentially working against the plant's evolutionary toolkit for survival? It makes you wonder about the balance, doesn't it? The limits of our interventions versus a plant's innate tendencies in the garden.
That's a fascinating point to ponder. Human selection versus natural predisposition. Definitely something to think about next time we're choosing a new Coleus.